What's up everyone, Justin here, and today I've got the full comparison between the Samsung Galaxy S4 and the Apple iPhone 5. The Samsung Galaxy S3, the predecessor to the S4, had proved itself very successful in the ever-growing Android market, while the iOS and the iPhone family had remained one of the most popular phone over all its generations. However, the big question that is still asked today by many smartphone buyers out there is whether to get an Android or iOS smartphone. And in simple words, both these devices do share their similarities and differences, and it really comes down to not only the user experience you're looking for, but which one is right for you. So just a disclaimer before I start this video, I'm going to give you guys this comparison in my point of view from using both smartphones. So let's go ahead and see how they stack up. So the first thing we're going to start out with is the hardware and durability. When you look at the screen size, the iPhone 5 has a 4-inch display, and Apple really didn't want to go any bigger because they wanted you to still be able to access all 4 corners of your display, while the Samsung Galaxy S4 absolutely towers the iPhone 5 with a display of almost 5 inches. When it comes to the specs of these two devices, the iPhone 5 is powered by an Apple A6 chip that is dual core and clocked in at 1.3 GHz, while the Samsung Galaxy S4 features a Snapdragon 600 quad-core processor clocked in at 1.9 GHz. However, the model I've got here is the international model, which has an Exynos 5 octa processor clocked in at 1.6 GHz. The iPhone 5 has 1 GB of RAM, while the Samsung Galaxy S4 has 2 GB of RAM. When comparing the form factor of these two devices, the Samsung Galaxy S4 is 7.9mm thick, while the iPhone 5 is 7.6, and in terms of the weight, the iPhone 5 comes in at 112 grams, while the Samsung Galaxy S4 comes in at 130. But to be honest, from my personal experience, I felt that the Samsung Galaxy S4 really just felt much lighter. It's possibly because it is spread out through much more area since the Samsung Galaxy S4 is a much larger phone. Flipping it over to the back, the Samsung Galaxy S4 has a polycarbonate removable back, while the iPhone 5 has an aluminum back, with the top and the bottom, which are the antennas, made out of glass. When you look at these two phones, which are premium smartphones, the iPhone 5 definitely takes it in terms of build quality. It is made out of a fully machined aluminum construction, and it gives it a really premium feel as it should for this caliber of a smartphone, while the Samsung Galaxy S4 and all its internals, etc., it still features the same design of the Samsung Galaxy S3 with a removable polycarbonate back, which at times some people may feel that it feels kind of cheap, considering that this is still a premium smartphone. So I feel that Samsung probably should have moved away from the polycarbonate construction. Taking a look at the connectivity of these two devices, the Samsung Galaxy S4 uses a standard micro USB for charge and sync, while the iPhone 5 uses Apple's new proprietary Lightning dock connector. Both these devices are available in 16, 32, and 64 GB configurations. However, the Samsung Galaxy S4 is expandable via micro SD to up to 64 GB. When it comes to the display, both of these phones look absolutely gorgeous. The Samsung Galaxy S4 has a full HD 1920 by 1080 resolution Super AMOLED display with a 441 ppi pixel density, while the iPhone 5 has Apple's Retina display coming in at 1136 by 640 resolution and 326 ppi. Despite the PPI difference, both these phones you really can't see any of the pixels on the screen. The additional PPI, in my opinion, on the Samsung Galaxy S4 just gives it a little bit more of the pop factor, and in terms of the color, both these devices didn't look too different. The iPhone 5 had a pretty accurate color representation, what I felt, and that the Samsung Galaxy S4 had a little bit of a higher contrast and saturation, and the colors overall look a little bit more vibrant and sharper. Some of the biggest differences between these two smartphones lies in the software. The iPhone runs iOS 6, of course, and the Samsung Galaxy S4 runs Android 4.2.2 Jelly Bean and Samsung's TouchWiz Skin. The controversy is usually stirred between this category because some people may state that the iOS interface gives you a better user interface with its simplicity, while others feel that Android gives you a much more customizable experience, which is true. However, regardless, it really comes down to what you need and what you like in terms of the OS, and that would pretty much decide what phone is best for you. It would also be pretty interesting to see what Apple does with the next generation of the iOS software. Some people may find that it is getting really boring, having remained the same since about 2007 when the first iPhone was unveiled. What it really comes down to is certain features that people think should be on iOS can otherwise only be found on Android, can only be done through jailbreaks on iOS. So first, let's go ahead and take a look at the Samsung Galaxy S4. Like I mentioned, it does run Android 4.2.2 Jelly Bean, and it also has Samsung's standard TouchWiz skin. And although some people may not like it, I did feel that there are quite a few new things that they did do, especially for the Samsung Galaxy S4 in terms of software. You can see that on Android, the multitasking bar is much different. You can see your windows running, and you can also close all your apps all at once. And another thing is you can also clear all your notifications as once. There are so many things you can do with Android, and I'm not actually going to show you everything. But you can also see that there are quick access settings here as well, which are really easy to access, such as your screen brightness if you want to change that throughout the day. And you can just see that it's a really different experience on Android. Some people may like it, some people may not. And here's just all your full settings, NFC, S-Beam, etc. My devices, and just look at all the settings and the interface here. There's also AirView, Smart Screen, and as you know, they did also add quite a few sensors to the Samsung Galaxy S4 in order to allow you to use stuff like Smart Scroll, Smart Pause, etc., which I'm going to show you guys later in the video. And you can also have some live widgets and live wallpapers, for example, running on your home screen. Another thing that you cannot do on iOS. So now let's go ahead and take a look at iOS, and you could tell that it gives you a much simpler experience, and Apple doesn't give you a whole lot of customization. You can see that all the tiles are pretty much laid out on the front page, and there's just a notification tab. And it isn't that I don't like iOS. I have been using it for the last 5 years, and I have enjoyed it, but it just doesn't give you a whole level of customization, such as having live widgets on the front page, etc. That's just the multitasking you could see down there, and it really just comes down to self-preference. iOS is a much easier, simpler, cleaner experience, and it is, for most smartphone users, much easier to use than it is for Android. Although Android isn't overly complicated, it does have a little bit of a learning curve, especially for first-time users switching to Android. It may seem a little bit strange, but it does give you a far better level of customization. As you know, iOS is, you can see here, really snappy, and it is a software optimized, because as you know, Apple and their products, the specs aren't always the best. However, the software is always optimized, and the devices still perform very well. Both these devices also have their own personal assistant. On iPhone, you've got Siri, of course, and on the Samsung Galaxy S4, you've got S-Voice as well as Google Now, depending on what kind of experience you want to get. And to activate it, you just need to hold on your home button for the iPhone and double tap the home button on the Samsung Galaxy S4, and there is also an option for a voice activation method as well. So both these personal assistants do work pretty well. On Siri, they pretty much let you give the basic functions: opening an app, calling somebody, setting an appointment, tweeting something, posting something on Facebook, sports scores, etc. And on Samsung Galaxy S4, you also get quite a few of the similar features, such as setting up a memo, add up contacts, call somebody, text somebody, play music, tasks, etc. So both these in general do perform pretty similar features. I'm not going to go into full details on which one actually performs better. However, both of them have their cons and pros, and they both do overall perform pretty well. All in all, in terms of the software, you can't really compare these two softwares and say one is better than the other. It really comes down to what experience you're looking for and what works best for you. The iPhone gives you a much more user-friendly, simple experience, but not a huge level of customizability, while in simple words, the Samsung Galaxy S4 pretty much lets you customize it to its limits. Of course, you can always jailbreak your iPhone, but many people do not prefer to do that, so it really comes down to what you're looking for. So now it's time to put the hardware of these two devices to the real test. The Samsung Galaxy S4 model I've got here is the international 8-core version clocked in at 1.6 GHz. The North American version that a lot of you will be getting has a Snapdragon 600 processor that is quad-core and clocked in at 1.9 GHz. The overall benchmark score shouldn't be too far off from this, and it also has 1.82 GB of RAM. On the other hand, the iPhone 5 has an Apple A6 chip clocked in at 1.3 GHz. It does seem to fluctuate depending on how much load it needs to handle, and it also has 1 GB of RAM. So now let's go ahead and run the benchmark itself. It really doesn't matter when I hit the button. The final score is what we're going to be looking at. So the Samsung Galaxy S4 finishes first with a really high score of 3,564. To compare, that was probably higher than my laptop when I first bought it before I made any upgrades. And the iPhone 5 comes out with a pretty respectable score of 1,667, which is pretty comparable to the predecessor of the Samsung Galaxy S4, the Samsung Galaxy S3. The next test we're going to run is GL Benchmark 2.7. We're going to run the Egypt HD one, and this is a graphical test, so it'll pretty much run a whole sequence, and it'll give you a final score in the end. So the animation itself is actually quite long. I didn't want to make you guys have to watch the whole thing, so let's just skip through it, and we'll go to the final score itself. So in the end, the final score of the Samsung Galaxy S4 came just short of the iPhone 5 with a score of 4,535, while the iPhone 5 got a score just edging the Samsung Galaxy S4 at 4,574. Moving on, now let's go ahead and test the Wi-Fi speeds on both these devices. The Samsung Galaxy S4 international version I've got here doesn't actually have LTE built into it, just to let you guys know. So I decided to run a Wi-Fi test on the same test server as well as the same networks to get an accurate result. And we will be testing one at a time just so it doesn't really clog each other and we can get some accurate scores. So now let's start the Samsung Galaxy S4. So let's just skip through this. And we got a ping of 19 milliseconds, a download speed of about 12.14, and an upload speed of about 6.41. So now let's begin the test of the iPhone 5. It gets a score of really close of 12.70, just edging the Samsung Galaxy S4, and the upload speed of 4.83. So all in all, from what these results show, it seems like both these devices in terms of download speed and overall Wi-Fi speed are very close. So the next test we're going to run is SunSpider, which is a JavaScript benchmark, and what it does is it sees how the CPU can handle websites. So on both these devices, I am running the default web browser. On the iPhone, I'm running Safari, while on the Samsung Galaxy S4, I'm running the standard Samsung web browser. So now let's go ahead and run the benchmark itself, and pretty much what it does is it runs a whole series of scripts that we don't really understand, and the lower score is better. So you can see that the Samsung Galaxy S4 came out with an impressive score of 699.4 milliseconds, while the iPhone 5 again coming out with a respectable score of 924 milliseconds. So last but not least, we've got to test out the real life speed test of loading a web page. So the first website we're going to load up is youtube.com, so let's just hit the go button there, and you can see that the iPhone 5 is just slightly faster than the Samsung Galaxy S4, although it was something like a split second of a difference. In real life, you really won't find it slow or anything. Both these devices are incredibly fast, so let's just go ahead and load our second site. So the second site we're going to open up is telus.com, which is the cell phone carrier I'm on, and you can see that the iPhone 5 is about 1.5 seconds faster than the Samsung Galaxy S4, and it isn't like the Samsung Galaxy S4 is slow or anything. Both these phones are extremely fast. However, you saw from the test that the iPhone 5 did edge the Samsung Galaxy S4 in terms of its speed test and download speeds. However, the SunSpider test proved that the Samsung Galaxy S4 was higher. But from what you can see here from the real life benchmarks, the iPhone 5 did beat out the Samsung Galaxy S4 by a little bit. Moving on to the camera, in my honest opinion, I feel that these two phones probably have the best cameras out in the market, and also the HTC One from the shots I've seen. The Samsung Galaxy S4 has a whopping 13 megapixel rear-facing camera, while the iPhone 5 has an 8 megapixel camera, and both of these phones also have LED flash built in for low light situations. But believe it or not, despite the megapixel difference, these two cameras definitely stack up and are very comparable. On the front, the Samsung Galaxy S4 has a 2 megapixel front-facing camera, while the iPhone 5 has a 1.2 megapixel front-facing camera. Both these phones definitely perform very well, and I'm going to show you guys some side-by-side photo and video tests in this video as well. And they do actually perform very well for stuff like Skype calls and on the iPhone FaceTime as well, which is what a lot of people will be using the front-facing cameras for. Before we move on to the actual test, we're going to take a look at the interface of both these phones. You can see that there's a flash control. The iPhone overall has a very simple interface. Obviously, you have touch to focus. There's also a grid as well as HDR option, and there is also panoramic photo, which is also pretty easy to use and does a pretty good job in my opinion. You can also flip cameras, but overall you can see that there isn't a whole bunch of functionality in the actual iPhone camera. It is really simple, but despite the fact that it is really simple, it still does a very good job. And there is also digital zoom built into it that I don't really recommend using, as it does distort your photos as you zoom in even more, but it's there if you need it. And on the other hand, the Samsung Galaxy S4 has a plethora of things you can do inside the camera software. You can see from all the features here that Samsung really wanted to emphasize. You also have a whole series of stock filters built in that are pretty fun to play with in my opinion. I guess it's a little bit like Instagram if you're thinking of using that as well. And you can also flip the cameras easily. As you see, it's really easy to do that as well, just like on the iPhone. There's also a dual shot mode, which allows you to record with the front and back facing camera at the same time, or vice versa. You can also resize a box and you can change the shape of the box showing the other camera. It is pretty cool because you can record stuff while having your reaction recorded as well. There's also a whole series of settings, such as manual settings of the photo size, ISO, and the settings that are built into the Samsung Galaxy S4 really allowed the photo enthusiasts to customize their settings and how they would like their photos to be taken with all the modes and settings that allows you to change. So now taking a look at the photos from the Samsung Galaxy S4 and the Apple iPhone 5, you can see that the S4 can shoot in 16:9 aspect ratio, and the photos overall look really good on both the phones. You see that the iPhone 5 colors are just a little bit sharper, you could also see here, and the Samsung Galaxy S4 with its higher megapixel count is great at capturing all those details. From what you could see here, they're taking pictures of the same objects, and in terms of the macro mode, I feel that the Samsung Galaxy S4 did slightly of a better job when you zoom into it, as the megapixels are able to capture more pixels and a little bit more detailed. But regardless, both the rear facing cameras on these phones do a really good job, and you won't be disappointed with either. When you look at the front facing camera, as you know, the Samsung Galaxy S4 has a 2 megapixel camera while the iPhone 5 has a 1.2 megapixel. In my opinion, the Samsung Galaxy S4 got a little bit of a sharper, wider shot, while the Apple iPhone 5 got a little bit of a better skin tone, but the shot obviously isn't nearly as wide as it is on the Samsung Galaxy S4. Taking a look at the video, both of these phones are capable of taking full HD 1080p video. You could tell the colors on the iPhone 5 just seem a little bit richer. You could tell from the color of the leaves down there. And in my opinion, I think the Apple iPhone 5 takes a little bit better video than the Samsung Galaxy S4. The colors overall are just more vibrant, although the S4 is still great at capturing the small details, as you can see in the flower there. But I have to say the iPhone 5 does have a little bit better video camera. When it comes to video on the front-facing camera, I think that the Samsung Galaxy S4 does get the edge. You can tell how much wider it is compared to the iPhone 5. Now onto the sensors and additional features seen on these phones. The Samsung Galaxy S4 has a plethora of new sensors such as the barometer, thermometer, RGB light sensor, proximity sensor, hydrometer, gyroscope, gesture sensor, accelerometer, and although many of these may seem really unnecessary, there are many things that can be done with these sensors. For example, Samsung's S Health that they introduced would sense the environment and give you some more information about that. There's also an IR blaster, so you can enable to control your TV, for example, or a Samsung TV, which is a pretty cool feature to see as well. And on the bottom, you've got another sensor there as well. And I think it's just great that Samsung has decided to add so many new sensors that can be used by software in the future. So I'd love to see what Samsung does with that. Some of the eye tracking features on the Samsung Galaxy S4 may include stuff like Smart Scroll or Smart Play, where it pretty much pauses and resumes your video according to if you're looking at your screen or not. And there's also Smart Hover, which quick preview things, and you can always turn all these functions off if you don't want to use them. On the other hand, the iPhone 5 has your proximity sensor to adjust the screen brightness, and also when you're making calls, it'll turn off the screen if your ear is there. And it also has this accelerometer for stuff like games, and it has pretty much all that you need. Most people won't need all these sensors that the Samsung Galaxy S4 has. However, it is cool that they've done all those things that can be optimized by software in the future. When it comes to battery life, the Samsung Galaxy S4 has a 2600 mAh removable battery, while the iPhone 5 has a much smaller 1400 mAh battery that is definitely not removable. And on real life testing, I did find that the iPhone 5 did last a little bit longer throughout the day than the Samsung Galaxy S4, and despite the fact that the capacity of the battery on the S4 is almost double of the iPhone 5, I can definitely understand that because the S4 has an Exynos Octa processor to power, as well as that really big display that is a 1920 by 1080 resolution that takes up about 40% of the power. So although from my testing I felt that the iPhone 5 battery did last longer than the Samsung Galaxy S4, all in all it is still pretty close. So now it comes down to the final verdict. The Samsung Galaxy S4 is Samsung's 2013 handset, while the iPhone 5 is Apple's 2012 handset, and it will definitely be a very interesting comparison when the iPhone 5S comes out. The Samsung Galaxy S4 is definitely a powerhouse in terms of its specs, and it definitely did beat out the iPhone 5 in many different categories on the spec sheet. Although the benchmark scores may not have proved in the iPhone 5's favor, when we ran real-life benchmark tests, it really stood its ground well. It has proved itself to be a really good software-optimized phone that really doesn't require all the power that the Samsung Galaxy S4 has, so the final decision for the consumer really comes down to the OS you're looking for. Whether you want a really simple, easy experience, while the Samsung Galaxy S4 gives you a much better level of customizability as well as some additional features that TouchWiz brings. Overall, this is just a comparison between the Samsung Galaxy S4 and the Apple iPhone 5. Be sure to hit that like button down below as it helps me out a bunch, and be sure to subscribe if you'd like to see some more content in the future. Stay tuned for some more Samsung Galaxy S4 videos. I'll see you all in my next video.